All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and I'm happy to welcome Andy. God dang, I can't talk this whole week long. Andy Worthington. I would like to welcome him back to the show now. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Scott. What's happening? Have you been overdoing it a bit on the indignation front that you can't even speak anymore, my friend?
No, actually, I'm trying to quit smoking cigarettes, and I'm pretty sure that I needed nicotine to make those neurons that do the talking fire correctly.
Okay.
I'm on, 7 out of 8 cylinders here.
Well, it's a good idea to give up, Scott. You know, I did that recently myself, but only because I got ill.
Yeah, well.
And I'm not regretting it, I have to say.
I'm not even sick, man. I just need the money. You wouldn't believe the taxes on tobacco around here. It's like communism or something. All right. Anyway, listen, everybody, here's the thing that's really important. It's a website, andyworthington.co.uk. And this guy that you're hearing chuckling on the other end of the phone here is the most important journalist on the issue of Guantanamo Bay. He's done the most work, the best work, the most comprehensive work on the American gulag down there in communist Cuba. He's the author of the book, The Guantanamo Files, and he made the movie Outside the Law, and he writes endlessly, updating every facet of the story of Guantanamo Bay, and he's doing a fundraiser right now. He's not asking for very much. It looks here, the latest entry says $800 more to help him reach his goal to continue his work. And I say that if you got a little money laying around that you can afford to spare, this is certainly a cause that's worth it. andyworthington.co.uk, and there's a nice little donate button right there on the right-hand side. So I'm glad I got a chance to say that. I hope it helps a little bit there, bud.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because, I think, websites like antiwar.com and other places that are trying to get a message across that is ignored by the mainstream or sidelined by the mainstream, part of the way that we're doing that is to challenge the kind of advertiser-funded model of the traditional media. And it's, we are looking at reader-funded journalism. And, when people do like what we do and are prepared to help us out, it's giving us a great independence to put out an important message, I think.
Right. I mean, wouldn't it be terrible if this was your job working at the Washington Post? You were supposed to cover Guantanamo, and you had to deal with those guys in order to get your article out? Who knows what they'd title it, what they'd leave out?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm always very grateful when great stories do get out in the mainstream, and I think that does happen. It does happen with the New York Times, and it does happen with the Washington Post, but not always.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the joke is they would never hire you to cover this story like this at all.
Well, the Times hired me once and then dropped me immediately.
The who did what?
The Times let me work on a front-page story back in February 2008.
Really?
Yeah, and that afternoon publicly apologized for employing me.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't know that. They must have gone back and heard one of your interviews with me or something.
Well, somebody rang him up and said, you can't employ this guy as a reporter because he has a point of view.
Right, unlike David Sanger or Michael Gordon.
It was the objectivity thing, You can write op-eds with opinions, but as a reporter, you've got to be apparently strictly neutral.
Yeah, especially
it was
in the Times.
kind of thing, but it was an honor in a way, Scott, because that article came out, and within hours, somebody in a position of authority had said, "We don't like you having employed this man, telling this story about somebody who died in Guantanamo and how badly we treated this poor old man."
Yeah, that's a great badge of honor you get to wear there.
Yeah, so.
Sounds like to me. All right, so listen, let's talk about this. WikiLeaks, The Unknown Prisoners of Guantanamo. A 5-part series, one more coming. What unknown prisoners of Guantanamo?
Well, these are the guys who even myself, burrowing away at, the furthest recesses of the internet over the years, trying to dredge up stories of people that we'd never heard of before who had been held in Guantanamo. Some of them had never, ever surfaced before, and they came out in this set of documents that WikiLeaks released. It's about 6 weeks ago now, and that I worked on the release of those documents with WikiLeaks. And it's because, Scott, although the U.S. government has been required since 2006 to make available documentation relating to the prisoners, so the tribunals and the review boards at Guantanamo, the allegations against them, I mean, in the first instance, just their names and their nationalities, because, the Bush administration kept a lid on everything for 4 years. But since then, there's been a certain amount of documentation about all the prisoners, apart from the first 200 to be released. So that's over a quarter of the 779 men held, and boys, held throughout the prison's entire history. And, so with my research, I'd managed to find out something, sometimes quite a lot, in other cases just small bits of information about, well, roughly half of these guys, but the other half were completely unknown. So they've come out in these WikiLeaks documents, the detainee assessment briefs that were written by the military, their recommendations about what kind of threat they thought the prisoners constituted, what they should do with them. And it's just, I'm going through them, I'm putting them in a format that people who care about these things can find it all in one place. And it's just a pretty sad succession of stories of mostly Taliban conscripts, so people forced to join the Taliban, Afghans, Pakistanis who may have been, encouraged to go and fight the jihad against the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. But I'd say over half of these stories are Afghans, and it's just phenomenally depressing, really, that when you add all these stories up, you just really do get to see how actually the U.S. military pretty much did round up all kinds of waifs and strays in Afghanistan, having let most of the serious dudes actually get away. They're just people who didn't want to fight with the Taliban, ended up, guarding some building somewhere. And then they, tried to run away when the whole thing came crashing down, got caught up, got sent to a notorious prison run by the Northern Alliance in northern Afghanistan in a lot of cases. They had to survive being transported there in a convoy of container trucks where thousands of people, we think, died on the way. If they managed to get through all of that, then, they're stuck in this horribly overcrowded, vile prison, and every now and then U.S. forces would turn up and pluck some of them away from there, take them to Kandahar, and send them on to Guantanamo. It's a really, it's a dispiriting collection of stories, but it's very important, I think, for ramming home again the truth about Guantanamo, which I've tried to make clear over all these years, that, this is not a place that held the worst of the worst. It held the least of the least in so many cases.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole thing was really set piece, like the Crawford Ranch that Bush bought during the primaries,
Right.
It was, look, everybody, there really is a bunch of terrorists out there want to kill us, not a couple of hundred, and we already killed half of them.
Right.
But so, I want to make sure I have this right. Now, none of these guys, the unknown that you're just finding out about, they don't appear to be CIA ghost prisoner types. These are people who were arrested or turned over by the Northern Alliance or the Pakistani military to the U.S. back in 01, maybe early 02 or something that they've had at Guantanamo all along, and somehow they've just completely gone undocumented until these WikiLeaks. Do I understand that right?
No, these guys were all released, Scott. They were the first 200 to be released. So mainly in 2003 and 2004, there were 200 people released.
Okay, so they were held for like a year or two.
Yeah, they were held for a year or two, 3 years in the cases of quite a lot of them, nearly. Mm-hmm. Who were captured at the end of 2001. There were a lot of people released in the summer and September 2004. They had a good while, in U.S. custody, the vast expense of transporting nobodies, from Afghanistan to Guantanamo. And, I think...
All right, well, hold it right there. I'm sorry, man. We got to take this break. Hang on just a minute. We'll be right back, everybody. It's Andy Worthington. .co.uk. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton. On the line is Andy Worthington. His website is andyworthington.co.uk. Writes for the Future Freedom Foundation, the Public Interest, and all kinds of other things all over the place. Antiwar.com. And he's the author of the book, The Guantanamo Files, and is always digging through all the new information about Guantanamo Bay. And now one of your articles here is about how the military commission system down there in Cuba is re-announcing the re-indictment of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and them, or the re-beginning of the prosecution that was called off before, or something of these guys. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, as you all know, there's at least like 6 guys down at Guantanamo who are actually bad guys.
Right.
What's going on with that?
Well, that's just, that is really just revisiting the past. These are the guys who were Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 other alleged co-conspirators who were, finally charged under the military commission system by President Bush in February 2008. And when Obama came into office, he said, no, we're going to freeze the commissions and have a good think about them. And having gone away and thought about them, he brought them back. Bit of a bad idea, that one, I think. Because it led to having 2 systems, federal court trials they wanted, but they also had military commissions, and it enabled the critics of the trials, of the federal court trials, to push for military commissions. They should never have brought them back. But they did, and so eventually when there was such an uproar about their plans to prosecute these guys in federal court, which Attorney General Eric Holder announced in November 2009, then it went on the shelf, and just sat there, really, all of last year, with Holder kind of occasionally saying, it's out of my hands, the White House took it off me. He, to his credit, said, we will be judged by how we handle this. It's the most important thing in my time as Attorney General. But he was overruled eventually, and, the commissions came back. So really, we've just wound the clock back to February 2008 with this proposal to try these 5 men in a trial by military commission, which is what the most furious right-wing Republicans always wanted, because it reinforces the problems at the heart of their beloved war on terror, which is that terrorism is a criminal activity, and what they have are criminals, but they desperately want them to be warriors. So, We're back to square one, really, on that front, and it's depressing, really, because I really don't think for something as important as this, the military commission system has the kind of internationally regarded legitimacy. Plus, also, every time that we've seen them try to proceed with a trial rather than to reach a plea deal, which is what they've done to date, and they're clearly not going to do that with these guys. Every time they've actually tried to proceed with a proper trial, it's been revealed that this is an inadequate system that's full of holes. And the last time they did it, frankly, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was standing up and making a mockery of the entire system, which is not really what they want to do with this man if he is genuinely guilty of what he's accused of. And it always seemed to me at the time, and this was in 2008, the end of Bush's term in office, it seemed to me it would have been much more sensible to have had these guys in a federal court where there would have been, much more opportunity and tradition to stop them from kind of taking over a broken system and running it as they felt like it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's such an important point about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed making a mockery out of thing. He got up there and he basically claimed responsibility for every terrorist act since the time of his birth, and for, the Obama presidency and Hurricane Katrina and everything else is his fault.
Yeah.
And and they've admitted that they drowned him to the very edge of death 183 times in a row. And so, even though he bragged to Al Jazeera before he ever got arrested and tortured that he did it, and everybody knows he did it, and just read good journalism on the story, he did it. But so, I mean, how is this thing, I mean, do they have any kind of decent plan for carrying out even this bogus trial here? Or is the whole thing just going to fall apart like the case against Thomas Drake a minute ago?
Who knows? I mean, they do have a case. They had, what Eric Holder described as a very, very solid case to be pursued in federal court. So, can they transplant that to a military commission system? Maybe they can. It would seem to me that what they would like to do in a politically expedient way, and I think that all that really matters now up to the next election is political expediency, is that if they can get this underway and be seen to have done something before the next election, then maybe they're hoping they'll get another bounce like they did with the Bin Laden bounce, which is apparently has worn off already. But I would think they would want to make political capital out of it. I just think, I think it's pretty depressing that it's nearly 10 years. These guys have been in U.S. custody for a huge amount of time, and yet it seems to be impossible to actually put them on trial. And I think we spoke before, didn't we, Scott, about how there is a longer history of this case, which reflects much better on the United States in the 1990s than the United States post 9/11, in that, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephew, Ramzi Youssef, who was apparently the mastermind of the first attempt to blow up the World Trade Center in 1993, his indictment was the first in a series of indictments culminating in the 9/11 indictments. But whereas since 9/11, when you put the words Guantanamo and terrorists together, people just lose their senses. In Ramzi Youssef's case, and in the case of the African embassy bombers from 1998, they were brought to justice in the United States. They had a federal court trial. They were found guilty. They're serving life sentences in prison in America. What has happened since 9/11 is not something of which the American people should be proud. And that really, it seems to me, is on national security issues. What's happened is that President Obama has behaved without any spine and has let his policies be dictated by the most kind of shouty, cynical, scaremongering type of old men in Congress that you could imagine. And that's really, not good for America. I know that it plays very well to sections of America itself. I think looking at it from abroad, these people look like a bit of a laughingstock, to be honest.
Well, yeah, it's certainly a bunch of bad precedents being set. If only, not if only, but certainly part of it is just how long it's gone on. Where basically now might as well just be a permanent part of America. From now on, we'll have this, prison outside the law down at Guantanamo Bay. Why not?
Sure.
Why ever bring it home now?
Well, there are certainly people who want that, and I think that there are two camps on the right of what to do with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his co-accused, and we seem to now have ended up with the decision to proceed with the trial by military commission. But I think that the way it had been going over the last couple of years was that some of those guys were thinking, actually, maybe we don't even need the trial at all. Why don't we just hold them forever? Why don't we establish a precedent, clearly, with some, notably accused bad guys? But let's forget it. We don't believe in the law anymore. Let's just hold them forever, and then we've got a great precedent for holding forever anybody that we want.
Well, and you're so right about how easy it would have been to just do it right, to just say, hey, and in fact, think of what a great counterterrorism tactic that would have been, to say, hey, look, world, we give fair trials, real, like, American Bill of Rights style fair trials to our very worst enemies. We're not afraid to give these guys to a New York jury. Just wait and see what they do to him,
Right,
and they could, and it would have been fine. And they had plenty of laws that made it illegal to blow up the World Trade Center,
Right, exactly.
All right, well, anyway, so here we are still getting deeper and deeper into it now, I guess,
Yeah, well, it doesn't go away, does it? We are ending up with a kind of default permanent Guantanamo, very different, really, under Obama's ownership to what the Bush administration had. Because the Bush administration actually, their biggest problem was that they didn't think about what they were doing. So they set up, all this offshore prison nonsense where they could torture people if that's what they felt like doing to them. They were obsessed with their actionable intelligence and with breaking all the pansy rules that had been laid down about how you treated people. They had no idea of how their project was going to come to an end. They might have entertained the notion that it was permanent, but they hadn't really thought about it. And sure enough, when they started getting a lot of international criticism, they had to back down on a lot of this stuff because, they just made it up and it was outrageous. President Obama has ended up having promised to close it and having failed to do that with a place that looks much more institutionalized, as though it is a permanent fixture. He owns it, and I'm really getting fed up with the easy ride that he's given. I don't know whether you saw recently, Scott, but he came over to Britain on the first state visit. And, I don't mind saying that I look at the guy and think, well, he seems like an intelligent enough guy, pleasant enough company. That's not how I want world leaders to be judged. I want them to be judged on whether there are some, stinking messes that they've left in their policies. And clearly there are, but he came over here and he was treated like something close to a god. Not a murmur of criticism, not a mention of, you've got one of our British guys still in Guantanamo. By the way, remember that closing Guantanamo bit? Well, I know it's a bit inconvenient for you because you're getting opposition, but it's quite important that you actually do this, because otherwise you're setting something up that's permanent. And you will be the person who gets the blame for that in the end. But nothing, no criticism of him at all. Just adoration. I kind of think that it's going to be up to the international community to maybe start trying to separate the image of the man from his policies and criticize him.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. It doesn't seem to be working, They show the pictures on TV of him walking with his family and whatever, and it's just like the royalty, He's the head of state. He's not just, the chief executive of the Article 2 departments or whatever. He's us. He's Mussolini on the balcony, man. That's what he is,
Yeah.
And what's funny here, too, is you look at all the reforms going on in Cuba right now. At the rate we're going, they'll have fairer trials in Cuba than, in communist Cuba, regime Cuba, than on our side of the wall. I mean,
right. Yeah.
We're really running neck and neck with Castro on this one here.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to figure out what angles to take on this, and I am talking to people here in Europe, and I'm talking to people in the States about, is there any leverage that we haven't thought of here? Are there any new angles that we can take just to try and raise this as an issue? I really think it will be troubling if we get to the end of Obama's presidency. I mean, his first term. Maybe he's going to win a second term. I don't know what's going to happen then. But if we get to the end of this presidential term without any resolution on these issues, and I think the same about the war as well, the wars, the huge and unstoppable military presence. I think something needs to have happened positively by the end of this presidential term. Otherwise, all this stuff to me ends up being written more in stone than anybody would have thought, and that's kind of worrying. It's kind of worrying, the trend of Obama having ended up as some kind of right-wing enforcer, as much by accident as by design.
Yeah, well, I don't know so much about the accident. I mean, he's continued, hasn't he, George Bush's policy of putting people at Bagram now, so they're even further beyond the reach of the law.
Well, I don't know whether there's new people at Bagram. I mean, I think a lot of the problem is, a legacy issues that he refuses to deal with and that nobody wants to talk about. The problem in Afghanistan, it seems to me, Scott, is that nobody like Obama rolled up in Afghanistan and said, you remember that guy Donald Rumsfeld and the way that he tore up the Geneva Conventions? Well, we don't agree with that. We're going to re-implement the Geneva Conventions so that we screen people when we capture them so that we don't end up holding hundreds of people for no reason for months and years, and then coming up with a kind of lame review process and maybe letting them go or handing them over to the Afghans or continuing to hold. Where's all this come from? This isn't in the Geneva Convention. This came from Rumsfeld. This came from the Bush administration. They rewrote the rules of law and of war, and it hasn't changed. He hasn't got the he hasn't got the will or any kind of intention to say to the military, this is how we need to be doing things.
Well, and the joke is, of course, this was his entire mandate. This is why he was elected. The American people were like, all right, great. We're going to elect a black guy with a Muslim-sounding name, and that's going to be our way of telling the world, hey, sorry about that whole George Bush thing. That was a mistake. We're trying to get back on the path of being the nice guy again and whatever. We're going to undo Guantanamo Bay and the wars. This is his whole mandate, was to give us a return to normalcy, not to double down on every bit of it, and the budget too.
Yeah. Well, no, I agree. And the fact that, some of the worst excesses of the Bush administration are over is not a positive enough reflection on him to say that he's fundamentally any different. I don't think that he actively embraces the same mindset as Dick Cheney, for God's sake. That would be hard. But that's what I mean. In his ability to deal with the legacy problems and to say, not only to say to the people who voted for him, I am addressing your concerns that you voted me in for, but in his inability to deal with it, he's reinforcing those legacy problems, and he will be counted as responsible for them. So, I kind of think it's pretty urgent over the next year and a half.
Well, don't let him off the hook either. I mean, when he gave that speech, the dueling speeches with Dick Cheney, they might as well have arranged that together on the phone beforehand, where Cheney comes out and goes, and does his Darth Vader thing, and then Obama goes, well, some people we might give trials, others will give military trials, others will hold forever without trial, but we're going to try to do it all in Illinois instead of Guantanamo. I mean, he is no different than Cheney from the very get-go there.
Well,
seemed
maybe.
Like to me.
I think that in some sense he is, but if the manifestation of those different points of view ends up looking almost identical, then it doesn't matter whether the intention was different or not. What we can judge somebody on is what they actually achieved. And he said some great things and failed to do anything about them. And he has noticeably lacked courage in a way that George Bush didn't. When George Bush was getting a load of flack, he actually eventually, on occasions, put his hands up and said, yeah, okay, all right, we won't do that anymore. Not this guy. We're asking him to do the right thing. There's always a good reason not to do the right thing. It's always going to be a bit politically difficult. I say, I don't care. You're the commander-in-chief. You're the president of the United States. Nobody else is. The last time I looked, you're supposed to have the final say on this. And he's not a man who has ever demonstrated his intention of having the final say on anything.
Right. It was funny. I was talking with Seymour Hersh, and I was asking him about, there's these Track 2 negotiations that Hersh writes about in his article. Thomas Pickering and some others, a former State Department guy, are trying to negotiate this thing with the Iranians. And I said, so they can't get an audience with Barack Obama? And Hersh says, well, he's so isolated, I don't even know if he knows about this. I could just see him up there like the emperor all shut away. He's only allowed to talk to like Hillary and one or two other people. He's not allowed to go on the internet or anything.
Well, it's quite an interesting image, isn't it? Yeah, maybe that's it,
He's just got a lot of peer pressure to deal with, Andy.
It's depressing in the reality of how to do this stuff, and that's why I keep hammering away trying to provide the education that's there for people if they want to understand what went wrong. The problem is that a lot of people don't want to understand what went wrong, and I don't know. I don't know whether if things economically get worse, as I suspect they are going to do globally, or certainly for the West. Whether that will make people wake up or whether it's actually going to drive people into further kind of dumb-headed stupidity. My fear is that it will be the latter.
Well, it'll be some of both, no doubt, I guess. The question is how far out of control will the out-of-control side be? And I can tell you there's reason to be pessimistic around here. That I saw a poll not long ago, I don't know, maybe half a year ago, that said that, now I like the first part. The American people don't trust the government at all. Not the Congress, not the courts, not the presidents, not the bureaucrats, not anybody. They don't like it. They're sick and tired of it. But who do they like? The generals. Now, the Pentagon, they can get things done. And how do I know? Because I watch football every week, and they advertise during football every week. And this is, these are the only people, the only institution, the only permanent institution in America that people trust is the military. So if times get too bad, I think it'd be a little too easy for some of those guys to just say, well, hey, who's going to distribute the bottles of water if not us,
Right. Okay.
And I think the American people might just go for it. I don't know. Depends on how bad it gets, really. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing about it is, all conspiracy theories about everyone being rounded up and thrown in FEMA camps or whatever, notwithstanding, they're basically setting up the law and the practice where they can do that. I mean, there's basically no limit on their ability to do that to us now. It's only a matter of, their will. How many people do they want to entrap? Right now, they like to go around and entrap Muslims into bogus terrorism cases. How long before they're going around and entrapping all kinds of Americans into the same ones? Why not at this point? There's nothing stopping them. No court's going to stop them.
Well, I think the problem is, is that, I mean, and I see the same things happening in Europe as well. We're seeing, a drift towards lawmakers and politicians who they very clearly, even more than going back 10, 15 years, have the concerns of the people at the heart of what they do. And it seems to me they're starting to strike more and more people off their radar completely, that they have no intention of helping out whatsoever. And, there are so many different ways of looking at this. There are so many different philosophical and political points of view, I think, of how you can see how badly broken and self-serving the system is. That it's just, will enough people come together in different ways to say, hang on, from all kinds of different backgrounds, whoever these guys are serving, it's not us. Because I think we need that kind of change,
Well, it ought to be possible, because the problems are pretty simple, right? You got the world empire, you've got the war against the old Bill of Rights, the old law that protected us from the government's powers, and you have the corporate welfare state, the military-industrial complex bailout for bankers state. And these are the problems that there's no left and right, conservative or liberal about it. You're either in on selling bombs to the Pentagon for a living or you're not,
Right,
it's us versus them, plain and simple.
Yeah.
So, should be, I don't know. It should be possible. I guess we'll see. It's already happening, in some ways. And you're helping. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate your time on the show as always.
Well, thank you, Scott. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
All right, everybody. That's the great Andy Worthington. AndyWorthington.co.uk. He's doing a fund drive, too. Chip in, y'all. Best work in the world on Guantanamo Bay.